Currently, 747 inmates are awaiting execution on California's death row.
Cynthia Kaufman.
Carrie Lynn Dalton.
Joe H. Abbott.
Jesse J. Andrews.
Julian A. Beltran.
Miguel Felix.
Marcus Fletcher.
Oscar Gates.
Anderson Hawthorne.
Jonathan Jackson.
Cedric Johnson.
Milton Lewis.
Valerie Martin.
Jarvis Masters.
Lam Nguyen.
Clifton Perry.
Michael Solis.
Timothy Young.
The Jewish poet Zelda wrote, "Each of us has a name given by God and given by our parents. Each of us has a name given by our stature and given by our smile and given by what we wear. Each of us has a name given by the mountains and given by the walls. Each of us has a name given by the stars and given by our neighbors. Each of us has a name given by our sins and given by our longing. Each of us has a name given by our enemies and given by our love. Each of us has a name given by our celebrations and given by our work. Each of us has a name given by the seasons and given by our blindness. Each of us has a name given by the sea and given by our death." What's in a name? Shakespeare asked. "A rose by any other name would smell just as sweet." In my house this week, we've been thinking a lot about the power of names as we've been sitting Shiva for Jonathan's mother, Lila Klein. Jonathan shared with me that in the Jewish tradition, the name is an essential part of the person. When someone is close to death, one belief to distance the angel of death is to undergo a name change ritual so that the angel of death is tricked and moves on away from the beloved, right? Maybe we should try that as a UU ritual sometime. The name given to a person is also symbolic. The reason Jonathan was named Jonathan is because that's a common name given when parents have gone through a lot of hardship in order for a child to be born. Before Jonathan's birth, his mother had 2 miscarriages. So Jonathan means gift of God. And after the sadness of those 2 miscarriages, and then the joy of his eventual birth and life, he certainly felt like a blessed gift to his parents. And then the Hebrew scriptures are filled with names that carry symbolic power and meaning. Moses, or Moshe in the Hebrew, literally means drawn up from the water. He was given this name by Pharaoh's daughter after she rescued him in his little basket floating on the Nile River. And then there's Jacob, who eventually became the father of the 12 tribes of Israel. He was renamed Israel after his wrestling match with the angel. Israel literally means he who struggles with God. Adam in Hebrew is Adamah, which means ground or earth. And one of the creation stories in Genesis tells us that God literally fashioned up a man right out of the clay earthen soil. Eve's Hebrew name is Hava, meaning mother of all living. And when Jonathan and I were married last April, as we put together our ketubah, our Jewish marriage contract, it was important for me to have a Hebrew name. Me, a Unitarian Universalist from Arkansas, raised Methodist. What? That doesn't make sense. Wait a second. But it was important as part of that ritual. And so my Hebrew name, taken from Tera Dawn, given to be by my mother, became Shachar Haaretz, which means dawn of the earth. And some of you know that I've made some jokes about my last name changing from Little to Klein, which means small in German. And I've told you that when I'm about 65, I'm going to change it to Pequeña. And so I already have my underground name here, Shachar Haaretz Pequeña, if you need to find me. And so all joking aside, my guess is that every one of you have stories about your name, about why it was that your parents thought it was important to give you the name you carry with you today. Perhaps you're named after a beloved family member. Perhaps you were named after a favorite song, a courting song that your parents enjoyed. Or maybe you were named after a place that had spiritual or emotional meaning for them. What was that story behind your name? And then for some of you, perhaps somewhere along the way, that name that was so lovingly given you at birth, perhaps that name didn't really fit you any longer. That happens. And so maybe you renamed yourself as a way to embrace a new identity, a new understanding of yourself, a way of letting your own soul unfurl its wings on your journey toward becoming a more authentic you. What's in a name indeed? Our own names comprise so much of our identity and so much of our sense of place in this world. And it feels really good when someone knows and remembers our name, doesn't it? When you walk in here, perhaps your second or third time, and a few of us have made the effort to know your name, this place starts feeling like home. How affirming it can be to go into a place where, like the theme song from the 80s sitcom Cheers, where everybody knows your name. We love it. But maybe we can also think of times when our name was forgotten. The disappointment when someone who made such an impression on us didn't remember our name or who we are or the context of that meeting. And we're also aware of the power that's held when we take away someone's name against their wishes. When we do that, we effectively strip away their identity, their culture, their family connection, truly their very essence. Can you imagine this afternoon when you walked out of here, if all of a sudden you were no longer George or Tara or Jamie or Lynn or Jean? What if you walked out of here and didn't have that name that has carried you through this world? Would you feel unanchored, a bit lost at sea? Over this past year, in Unitarian Universalism, those of us who identify as white have awakened more to an understanding that what many of us have just considered as typical or standard American culture is actually a culture that's steeped in what some people call white supremacy. And so by that phrase, I mean that so many of the institutions that we know, that we work in, that we learn in, that we play in, yes, even that we worship in, that they were created mainly by white people and mainly with structures that were put in place that benefit other white people. Inadvertent though it may be today, and surprising as it may feel today. So I'll admit to you all that I've had a really hard time with that phrase, white supremacy. And you don't need to raise your hands, but it may be that others of you also have had a hard time with that phrase as we've heard it said in our movement over the past 6 months to a year. And I've had a hard time with it as how it might pertain to me. Because in my mind, that particular phrase, it is forever connected to Nazis and people holding white sheets, committing acts of torture and terror on Jews, on black and brown bodies, on anyone who doesn't look white and heterosexual. That's not me. And I know that that's not you. And I know that some of us moved into Unitarian Universalism because we were trying to escape in a lot of ways that kind of predominant culture. So it feels shocking to think, after moving halfway across the country and claiming this as a faith, have I inadvertently walked into that again? If you're a white person in this room, and if that phrase is giving you a reaction and you're feeling a little hot under the collar and you're composing a text message to me right now, I know. I got it. I know. I'll just ask you to breathe into it a little bit with me and know that it makes me uncomfortable too, maybe even more than it does you, if you can believe it. And I'll ask you to just hold on to that phrase gently. I'm not asking you to own it for yourself, and just hold any feelings of discomfort that it might have brought into this space with you. The reason I bring up this phrase, white supremacy, today, when we're clearly talking about mass incarceration, is because one way we see this culture of white supremacy in action is through our criminal justice system. I'm sure for a lot of you, that's no surprise. Our criminal justice system, it swims in systemic racial bias, which results in mass incarceration and a disproportionate number of black and brown people who are living on death row. African Americans are 6 times more likely to be sent to prison for the exact same crimes that a white person would commit. And 1 in 3 black males today can expect to spend time in prison in his lifetime. And I know that none of us think that that's okay. A line can be traced directly from the system of institutional American slavery through the post-Civil War black codes and Jim Crow laws that resulted in racial terrorism, through today's high incarceration rates for people of color, especially for black men. So the forms in each of those time periods in our American history, the forms look different, but the results are the same. Isolation, marginalization, dehumanization, people that we don't quite see as fully human, a loss of name, sense of self, and a loss of a sense of purpose. So if what I just said is a surprise to you, that's okay. Or if you want to learn more, I recommend reading either The New Jim Crow by Michelle Alexander or the book Just Mercy, A Story of Redemption and Justice by Bryan Stevenson, or by watching the documentary 13th, which I think you can still get on Netflix, by director Ava DuVernay. These works are all well-researched, eye-opening, and they would make great learning circles for any of us at Troop who would choose to be on that journey of greater understanding together. Hint, hint. In our worship services this month, we've been talking about this theological concept of mercy. First, during our blessing of the animals, I asked you to expand ever outward your own covenant of hearts with the animals in your life or animals out in creation. And then last week, I asked you to stretch yourself wide enough to try to take in all of humanity into your covenant of hearts. Even though as humans, we know we break our vows at least 1,000 times. And then last week, I offered this as a possible way to think of mercy in our Unitarian Universalist tradition. Mercy is every one of us bound together in a covenant of hearts with all creation, in which we offer nurture, protection, compassion, and love to each other and to ourselves, even though we've broken our vows 1,000 times. Every day, a new opportunity to answer the call of love in our lives. And as I thought about mass incarceration this week and this sense of mercy and held on to that brief reading I shared in the sermon about the UU minister who said, even the leaf blower that drives me batty on the mornings that I'm writing my sermon, even that person is worthy of mercy. I wondered about my own self and how far really am I able or willing to stretch? As the sermon began, you heard the names of 18 people living on California's death row. The Los Angeles Times recently published a pictorial list of all 747 people. It includes their name, a picture, the crime or crimes that were committed, when they were sentenced, and the time served to date on death row. That was not fun sermon research to do. It's hard to see those faces. Harder still to read about the crimes they were convicted of, and for that brief moment to have a visual picture of what that crime scene could have looked like, to imagine the gentle, noble, worthy lives that were lost. How far, how wide can my mercy stretch out? I found as I was trying to decide on names to share, I wanted to look through, I wanted to analyze, I wanted to choose ones that didn't seem that bad. I wanted to choose names that I could create this alternate world that maybe that crime didn't happen. Maybe they were unjustly sentenced. Maybe they were wrongly accused, and maybe so. And maybe not. And what does it mean to name those names in this sacred space? And what did it mean for me as your pastor to allow, if you will, those names to touch your own gentle souls, you people that I have this very protective feeling about? How wide was I able to stretch? Unitarian Universalism declares that all persons, whether you are in the free world or whether you are imprisoned, are worthy of love, respect, and support, not at some future time when we are all better people, those perfect people that we strive to be, but as we are right now, all of us. Though we may have broken our vows 1,000 times, a piece of our calling as Unitarian Universalists is to name the names of those forgotten, to name the names of those our system dehumanizes. And so we named a few names today. And what would it be for us if we decided to make a practice of naming names of those who have been forgotten and dehumanized? What would it mean for our spiritual lives? And what would it mean for us stretching our boundary of mercy in the world? In his book, Just Mercy, Bryan Stevenson lifts up the complexities of this concept of mercy, of holding both the beauty of the world in one hand and all the complexities and pain of the world in the other, and creating a life that makes sense somehow out of all of it. Stevenson worked as an attorney in Alabama, representing people who were on death row. Reflecting on his experience, he wrote, "As I slowly made my way home, I understood that even as we are caught in a web of hurt and brokenness, we're also in a web of healing and mercy. I thought of the boy that hugged me outside the church, creating reconciliation and love. I didn't deserve reconciliation in that moment, but that's how mercy works. The power of just mercy is that it belongs to the undeserving. It's when mercy is least expected that it's most potent, strong enough to break the cycle of victimhood and victimization, to break the cycle of retribution and suffering. It has the power to heal the psychic harm and injuries that lead to aggression and violence, abuse of power that can lead ultimately to mass incarceration." And so today we began to name a few names. In the coming days, may we find ways to continue to hold names of those forgotten and dehumanized. And remember, as complex as it is, we all breathe in for all that is our life. Amen, and may it be so. And we take that breath in together as we sing our closing hymn.